Welcome back to today's Explainer. Today, we are diving right into a really fascinating memoir by R.C. Howard titled Life Lessons of a Man-Child. Now, what makes this material so incredibly interesting is how it uses pure Gen X nostalgia. We're talking VHS tapes, 8-bit video games, classic 80s movies, as a launchpad to discover some profoundly deep spiritual truths. We're going to dedicate this entire explainer to one very specific, powerful theme found throughout his work: finding God through writing. Right off the bat, Howard writes, "I wrote this book to prove that creativity is worth reclaiming." And what's really striking here is how he frames the very act of writing as a form of rebellion. I mean, think about the world we live in right now. It is completely driven by algorithms, endless doom scrolling, and just constant digital distractions that totally zap our creativity. For Howard, physically putting words on a page is his defiance against all that noise. It's a way to reclaim that sense of wonder we so easily lose as adults. Which leads us to a pretty fascinating question, right? Can the simple act of writing actually uncover the divine? Well, it's a narrative hook that Howard's journey answers with a resounding yes. But guys, here's the kicker. Howard is a self-proclaimed man-child who openly admits he absolutely hated reading growing up. No way he'd pick up a book. He vastly preferred VHS movie marathons and video game side quests. Yet, it was through the highly unlikely avenue of crafting his own stories that he actually found his fate. All right, Section 1, a nudge to write. Every hero's journey starts with that initial call to action, right? Well, for a guy who didn't exactly consider himself an author, that spark came in July 2024. Picture this. Howard is just sitting in a doctor's office with his dad, a proud Marine whose health had seen a lot of ups and downs. Out of nowhere, his dad casually turns to him and just says, you should write a book. His dad actually remembered stories Howard had written over a decade prior, and, he still believed in them. That one simple, casual nudge instantly tipped the scales for him. It was the exact catalyst he needed to finally stop hiding his words. But as you might guess, the doubts crept in almost immediately. He really had to ask himself, what and who am I really writing for? Remember, this is a guy whose lifelong mantra was literally, if a book is good enough to be a movie, I'd rather just spend 2 hours watching it. So he had to battle some serious self-doubt here. Was he writing for validation? Was he doing it to impress faceless critics? Ultimately, he realized he wasn't writing for perfection at all. He was writing because our stories deserve to be told. Moving on to Section 2, Battling the Nothing. So, here is where Howard outlines the trials of adulthood, and he uses this fantastic reference to the classic 1984 movie, The Never-Ending Story. Just like that dark force called the Nothing consumes the magical world of Fantasia in the film, Howard defines the nothing in our own lives as the destroyer of wonder. It's that adult loss of creativity, imagination, and faith that gets buried under the crushing weight of routine and fear. For Howard, sitting down to write became his ultimate weapon, his rebellion against this force that tries to devour our inner child. But let me tell you, pushing back against that is not easy. Howard actually personifies his internal doubts as a broken record player that he calls DJ Fear Factor Flash. This DJ is just constantly spinning these toxic tracks of rejection, inadequacy, and irrelevance in his mind, always whispering that he's too old or unqualified. So how does he defeat it? He metaphorically lifts the needle on that record of fear and drops the needle straight onto Queen's Another One Bites the Dust. He uses the physical act of writing to actively silence those fears and take his voice back. Which brings us to Section 3, Discovering the God Tags. Now we are getting into a deeply personal piece of fiction that served as the bridge between his creativity and his faith. Howard details a scene where a Marine on a flight over the Atlantic is absolutely paralyzed by a fear of flying, heavily compounded by survivor's guilt. Sitting right next to him is a little girl whose father has passed away, and she is clutching a small cross. The Marine tries to comfort her by explaining that even when you can't literally see God, you can trust He's there, listening. And saying that out loud actually sparks a profound realization within the Marine himself about what it means to trust to be unseen. Howard makes this absolutely brilliant comparison here between military dog tags and what the little girl calls her God tags. Think about it. On side one, dog tags are highly tangible. They are metal relics of war and past trauma. But on side two, God tags are entirely intangible. They are relics of faith, representing a really deep trust in the unseen. By reflecting on this specific story as he was writing it, Howard realized that having faith is exactly like trusting the creative process. You can't always see the final picture,
but you trust the unseen hands guiding you.
As he puts it in the book, faith works because we let it, because we trust it to. Writing this fictional story helped Howard realize the belief isn't about having all the answers lined up, and it doesn't require visible proof. It's really about surrendering to your purpose, even when you're flying through life's heavy turbulence.
Section 4. Shedding the doubter's mask.
This brings us right to the climax, where the very act of writing forced the author to confront his own deep psychological defenses. It's a progression. First, writing forced him into facing the memories. Second, dropping the pride. He realized he'd been walking around wearing what he calls his Mr. Success and Peacekeeper facades, basically keeping God at a manageable distance so he could feel like he was in control. Third, shedding the doubter's mask. Once he stopped demanding answers and started actually trusting, that mask just fell away. And finally, step 4, spiritual surrender. Through writing, he realized he wasn't the one in control at all, which led to a genuine trust that God actually is. And guys, this is perhaps the most emotional revelation in the entire book. When Howard was a kid, he made a pact with his Mima, asking her to somehow let him know when she made it to heaven, just so he would know for sure that God is real. Well, after she passed, his aunt experienced this single, completely inexplicable phone ring that really felt like a miracle. But it wasn't until Howard actually sat down to write about these memories years later that the truth finally clicked. The pact wasn't just kept, it was a message. It showed him that God uses our stories, our memories, and our writing to communicate with us and remind us of his presence, especially when the world gets way too noisy.
And now, Section 5. Create before it's too late.
So what does this all mean for us? Shifting to a really powerful call to action, Howard breaks down his acronym for life lessons, and the core takeaway is this: living in fear ends, and learning I'm finally enough. Creating something, anything, isn't about chasing perfection. It's not about writing a New York Times bestseller or desperately trying to avoid typos. It's about realizing that you, exactly as you are right now, are enough, and your stories are meant to leave a legacy behind. Tell your story. Share your weird. I absolutely love that phrasing. Howard enthusiastically reminds us that stories are meant to outlive us. He's urging you to embrace your inner child, to push back hard against the nothing, and to realize that sharing your truth, whether you write it down, paint it on a canvas, or literally just tell it around the dinner table, is proof that you were here. Which leaves us with this final, really provocative question for you to chew on. What story will you write to connect with the divine before it's too late? R.C. Howard found God. He shed his doubter's mask, and he completely reclaimed his creativity simply by picking up a pen and trusting the process. The blank page is out there, waiting for you. Reclaim your creativity, find your own spiritual connection, and share it with the world. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and honestly, I can't wait to see what you create.